everyone, and welcome to Think Future. My name is Chris Kalabukas, and once again we're coming at you live from deep, deep, deep in the heart of Silicon Valley, California. We're talking AI, startups, and the future. Not necessarily those, and not necessarily in that order. If you're watching on YouTube, smack that subscribe button and hit that bell so you can be notified when a new show comes online. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast service, please subscribe and please drop a note on Apple Podcasts. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Now, some of you might say, what happened to Chris? What happened to his ebullient attitude? He seems a little more sedate, and he's speaking a little slower and a little deeper. Well, I've been told that I speak too fast. I go too quickly. So, I've said this before, but if you listen to this podcast at double speed, I'm fine with that. I have no problem with you listening to this podcast or even watching this podcast on YouTube in double speed. Works for me, works for you. And if you're interested specifically in AI, then take a look at aidaily.us, which is our sister podcast, which focuses specifically on daily news in AI. Because on this show, I might veer off into whole different topics. Like I said, AI startups in the future, but not necessarily those, and not necessarily in that order. And as a matter of fact, today's show is going to be none of those. So if you want to switch it off, if you want to listen to something else, be my guest. But if you want to hear something interesting, something that might pique your interest, then keep going. So I was talking to my son the other day about Fooly Cooly. And Fooly Cooly is an anime program from, I believe it's from the early 2000s. And it was a very short series, but it was it had a lot of depth to it. It had a lot of depth to it. And if you're familiar with it, if you're not familiar with it, it's got all sorts of layers of teenage angst. It's got growing up overtones. It's got science fiction overtones. It's got robots coming out of people's heads. It's kind of a little bit insane. It's got people slamming each other with musical instruments. It's kind of insane. But it was interesting. It's interesting television. And one of the things that has struck me in media across the board is something I like to call the flattening. And one of the metaphors in Fooly Cooly is this giant factory called Medical Metallica or something like that. I forget. And the factory appears to be a giant iron with steam coming out of it, kind of like a steam iron with a hand holding the iron. It appears to be that because it sits on the horizon. It's a huge factory. And it sits on the horizon. And the interesting thing about it is that this story, or the storylines in Fooly Cooly, are super deep. There's many, many, many intricate storylines layered on top of each other. And there's storylines for every type of audience. And one of the things that happens during the show is that this iron starts ironing over the town. And they have to stop it, and it's run by aliens or whatever. And there's a little craziness. And since then, they've made 2, 3, 4 seasons of it. There was a really long period of time between the first season and the second season, and then the second, third, and fourth seasons are coming quicker and currently. And one of the things that we noticed when we were talking about season 1, season 2, season 3, season 4, is that the stories got progressively simpler and less complex as we were going through. So the initial series had tons of layers to it. It was thick. And media, from my perspective, in general, used to be that kind of thickness, at least the really good media. Obviously, there was simplistic media. There's lots of simplistic media out there. In fact, most of the simplistic media, say for children, does not have a lot of layers to it. But if you look out there at the kind of media that was coming out in the 2000s or even earlier than that, some of the best media had a lot of depth to it. Things like Blade Runner, things like Toy Story. All of these things had many layers of depth to them. TV shows had layers of depth to them. But over time, and this is something that's actually happening in Fooly Cooly, is that these irons started flattening the depths. And we've gone from multiple storylines that overweave each other in a highly complex way and have different storylines for different individuals and different characters to a highly simplistic storyline, a single storyline, simplicity itself. And we've gone from complex stories where a lot of thinking had to be, the audience had to fill in the gaps as to what was going on, to sledgehammer, tell you what is going on, obviously show you what is going on. Don't leave anything to nuance. Don't leave anything to the audience to have them fill in the blanks. That's what's happened to media. Media has flattened from highly complex media that forces the audience to think about what's going on, to fill in the blanks themselves, to highly simplistic media where everything is banged into your head over and over and over again without any kind of nuance, without any kind of thought. Just, here's my message, bang, 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 bang. Don't do it in a subtle way. Do it in a harsh way. And I'm feeling that this is what's happening across the board to all this media. We've gone from artists crafting intricate stories to artists banging you overhead with a sledgehammer to get their message out. And you can see it in the new media. That's basically what's happening, is that very simplistic stories, the stories that are told are super simplistic, and they don't have a lot of layers to them. They're flat. So if you're out there creating media, I urge you to do the opposite. Start telling stories that are more complex, that are multi-layered, that are multi-hued and have nuance. Don't just put things in to hammer your message into the brain of your audience. Give them some benefit of the doubt that they'll be able to, as human beings, figure out what you're trying to say without telling them exactly what you're trying to say. Don't add explanatory scenes specifically to bang it into their heads. Leave it open. Let them figure it out on their own. Give them nuance. Be more like Ernest Hemingway. Simplify, but leave it open. Let them fill in the blanks. Make it more. Bring the audience into the constructive process instead of telling them exactly what they should think. Because I think this is what's happening with media today, is it's becoming so simplistic and so unnuanced that we're going to look back on this years from now and go, wow, we were in a period where we didn't think the audience had any intelligence. We didn't think the audience was able to fill in the blanks or cross the T's or come up with the kind of ending that we wanted them to come up with. So if you're a creator, if you're a crafter, if you're doing things for an audience, give them the benefit of the doubt. Be more nuanced. Don't bang them over the head with a sledgehammer with your ideas. Let them try and figure it out on their own. Give them the clues and let them construct the story. That's it for me for today. See you next time, and until then, don't forget to think future.